Welcome to the Human Archive. If you enjoy original science fiction stories about humanity finding its place among the stars, subscribe and join us for the next one. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Rehabilitation Ward. Dr. Nuvor Calix had expected the Human Military Rehabilitation Center to feel like a place where careers ended. It did not. The doors opened on laughter, swearing, and the steady mechanical rhythm of someone running on an assisted treadmill. Nuvor stopped just inside the entrance. Across the rehabilitation hall, a human with a carbon composite prosthetic hand was transferring small metal pins from one tray to another using fingertip grip. At the next station, a woman strapped into a powered walking frame was practicing controlled steps while a therapist monitored her spinal response. Farther back, another patient with a heavily reconstructed shoulder sat inside a simulator cockpit, working through some kind of flight control exercise while a technician adjusted resistance. Several patients wore duty uniforms rather than ceremonial ones, clothing meant to be used, not displayed. Nuvor's smaller diagnostic manipulators shifted against his lower chest. This is the Military Rehabilitation Wing. Dr. Beatrice Holloway glanced at him. Yes. You said that already. I am confirming. That's very doctor of you. She walked ahead. Nuvor followed. Beatrice Holloway was compact, gray beginning to show in her dark hair, and possessed the alarming human habit of looking amused during discussions Nuvor considered serious. He had spent 3 days with her already. He had concluded this was probably permanent. How many patients are currently assigned here? He asked. Depends what you count as assigned. Nuvor looked at her. Humans say that often. Because humans make categories badly. That is not reassuring. She smiled. About 180 active cases in this wing, more if you include outpatient rehab. How many remain military personnel? Most. Nuvor stopped. Beatrice kept walking for several steps before noticing. She turned. What? You said most. Yes. Even those with permanent impairment. Some of them. Nuvor looked across the room again. A human man passed on the far side of the hall using a cane. His left leg moved stiffly through an articulated brace. He wore sergeant's insignia. Nuvor gestured subtly. He remains in service. I don't know his case. You do not automatically discharge personnel who can no longer meet previous physical standards. No. Why? Beatrice considered him for a moment. That question is going to take longer than you think. I have time. You're on a medical exchange. I have been instructed to learn. Dangerous attitude. Nuvor ignored that. The Brumethi military medical system was highly developed. Severely wounded personnel received excellent trauma care. Those unable to return to duty were granted full pension, long-term medical support, housing assistance, and placement services. They were cared for and honored, but they were not generally kept in uniform. Military roles were specialized for a reason. A combat soldier trained to fight, a reactor technician trained for engineering, and a field medic trained for medicine. Permanent impairment in one specialty usually meant honorable separation rather than years of costly retraining into another. Nuvor did not consider that cruel. To him, it was efficient. Nuvor had expected humans to recognize that. Instead, he saw a soldier with half a mechanical hand concentrating fiercely on picking up a pin. The pin slipped from the prosthetic fingers and struck the tray. The soldier swore, listened to something from his therapist, swore again, and tried once more. Nuvor watched. What is he doing? Beatrice followed his gaze. Fine motor retraining. For what assignment? Don't know yet. Then why train before assignment is established? Because he needs his hand. Nuvor looked at her. That is not a military answer. No. Beatrice kept walking, Nuvor followed, and the distinction continued to bother him. They passed hydrotherapy bays, gait labs, occupational therapy rooms, neural adaptation suites, and prosthetic fitting stations. Human rehabilitation was not crude. Nuvor had expected ingenuity from a species famous for surviving physical trauma. He had not expected this much infrastructure. He asked, how much does this facility cost to operate? A lot. How much? Beatrice gave him a number. Nuvor's respiratory crest darkened. That is one facility. Correct. How many exist? Military only. Yes. She gave him another estimate. Nuvor slowed and Beatrice looked back at him. You're doing the accountant face. I do not have an accountant face. You absolutely do. This is an extraordinary resource commitment. Yes. To personnel who may never return to their original duty. Yes. He waited for qualification. None came. Then how do you justify it? Beatrice stopped. Her expression did not harden, at least not yet. Depends which justification you're asking for. There are several. There usually are. She pointed toward the nearest therapy bay. Medical answer because they need care. Nuvor waited. Human answer because they're people. He waited again. Beatrice watched him. You want the military answer? Yes. She nodded. Experienced people are expensive. Nuvor glanced across the ward. That statement is incomplete. Good. She started walking again. You're learning. Chapter 2. Broken Soldiers. Nuvor met Sergeant Major Darius Wynn 2 hours later. He noticed the prosthetic first. That would bother him later. At the time, it seemed medically relevant. Darius was standing beside a rehabilitation stair rig with one hand on the rail. His left leg ended below the knee and continued in a dark composite prosthesis fitted through a powered ankle assembly. The artificial limb was well designed. Nuvor could see that immediately. The prosthesis used load compensation at the joint, responsive alignment, integrated balance sensing, and a flexible footplate. It was the kind of system built for daily use rather than demonstration. Darius climbed 3 steps, stopped, descended, turned, and repeated the exercise. His gait was almost natural, though not quite. The artificial ankle corrected smoothly when weight shifted. A therapist watched from nearby. Again. Darius looked at her. You enjoy this? I enjoy billing you. I'm military. Then I enjoy billing the government. Darius went up again. Nuvor observed for several minutes before Beatrice introduced them. Darius, this is Dr. Nuvor Calix. He's here from the Brumethi Medical Corps. Darius looked down at him. Nuvor was tall by human standards, but Darius was broad enough that the comparison felt misleading. Doctor. Sergeant Major. Darius stepped away from the rig. Here to study prosthetics. Partly. Good luck. Half the engineers disagree with the other half. Beatrice said, That's how you know they're engineers. Nuvor studied the prosthetic. How long since the amputation? 18 months. Blast trauma. Darius nodded. Station boarding action. Complications. Some. Beatrice gave Nuvor a look. He recognized it. Humans disliked aggressive clinical questioning outside formal examination. He adjusted. Are you returning to combat duty? Darius's expression changed slightly. No. Nuvor nodded. That aligned with expectation. Then you are preparing for medical discharge. Darius looked toward Beatrice. Beatrice looked at Nuvor, and the silence became uncomfortable. Nuvor realized he had misunderstood something. Darius said, I'm being reassigned. To what? Boarding defense training and station response doctrine. Nuvor looked at his prosthetic again. Darius noticed. Leg doesn't do much teaching. I did not intend insult. No. No. Nuvor tried to reconstruct the situation. You were infantry. Among other things. You are no longer medically cleared for frontline assault infantry. Correct. Yet your military has chosen to retrain you into another service role. More like use the training I already have. Nuvor turned toward Beatrice. How common is this? Common enough. For permanently impaired personnel. Depends on the impairment, depends on the person, depends on the job. Nuvor frowned. That is administratively inefficient. Darius's eyebrows rose. Beatrice sighed. Nuvor continued, trying to make the concept precise. In Brumethi service, a soldier who cannot meet the physical requirements of the assigned specialty is medically retired with full benefits. Continued treatment is provided, but the military position is filled by an uninjured replacement. Darius folded his arms. Nuvor said, This avoids spending additional resources. attempting to preserve the usefulness of broken soldiers. The room went quiet without any dramatic reaction, which somehow made it worse. The therapist near the stairs stopped moving. Beatrice and Darius both looked at him. Nuvor's respiratory crest warmed as he realized he had made an error. Translation problem. Beatrice's voice was colder now. Maybe. Nuvor checked the translation, found the term accurate, and tried again. I mean soldiers whose bodies have been permanently damaged beyond the requirements of their original function. Beatrice said, "We don't keep broken soldiers." Nuvor nodded, relieved. Then I misunderstood. "We keep soldiers who got hurt." He stopped. Beatrice stepped closer. "People aren't equipment." "I did not mean." "I know what you meant." Her voice softened slightly. "That's the problem." Nuvor looked toward Darius. The human sergeant major did not appear enraged. He looked tired, which somehow felt worse than anger. Nuvor said, "My species does not discard wounded personnel." "Didn't say you did." "We provide lifetime medical care, housing assistance, and pension." "Good," Beatrice said. "All of that is good." "Then what distinction are you making?" Beatrice glanced toward Darius. He answered for her, "You assume the job ends when the body changes." Nuvor hesitated. "If the body no longer meets requirements, yes." Darius nodded. "Sometimes it does." Nuvor looked at him. "Sometimes. Some people retire, some have to, some want to." He tapped the side of his prosthetic shin. "I can't do my old job the same way anymore." There was no denial in his voice, no heroic insistence. "I can't run 20 kilometers under load the way I used to. I don't move through bad terrain the same. There are assignments I'm not getting back." Nuvor relaxed slightly. At least the human recognized limitation. Then Darius said, "But I still know things." Nuvor's small manipulators shifted. "What things?" Darius smiled without humor. "Enough to keep younger soldiers from making the same mistakes I did." Beatrice looked at Nuvor. "That's the military answer." Nuvor considered both of them. "You retain personnel because their experience may exceed the cost of adapting their duties. Sometimes, even after severe impairment." "Yes. That still does not explain the scale of your rehabilitation system." Beatrice's expression changed again. "You're still starting in the wrong place." "How?" "We rehabilitate Darius because Darius needs rehabilitation." Nuvor looked at her. "Whether he remains military." "Yes." "Even if he could never work again." "Yes." "Then the military value is secondary." "Correct." Nuvor absorbed that. "It was in some ways more alien than the prosthetic," Darius said. "But since I can work, wasting 15 years because one leg got blown off would be pretty stupid." Nuvor looked at him. 15 years. "Service." Nuvor's respiratory crest cooled. The same idea had returned again. Time. Beatrice had used the same concept. Nuvor still believed the system was inefficient. He was beginning to understand what the humans were counting. Chapter 3. What experience costs. The next morning, Nuvor attended one of Darius's training sessions. He expected physical instruction. There was some, but most of the lesson came from watching the trainees embarrass themselves. The trainees were young soldiers assigned to station security. Darius gave them a simulated boarding scenario and then spent 40 minutes demonstrating how thoroughly they had misunderstood it. Nuvor watched from behind the observation glass. The simulation involved a medical deck, a damaged transit corridor, civilians under evacuation, and hostile boarders attempting to reach station command. The trainees defended the obvious junction. Darius stopped the exercise. "Why are all 6 of you here?" The squad leader answered, "Primary access point." "According to what?" "Station map." Darius nodded. "And the enemy has a station map too." Silence. He enlarged the tactical display. "You stacked yourselves in the strongest defensive position." "Yes, Sergeant Major." "Which means?" The trainees looked at one another. Darius sighed. "It means anyone competent goes around you." He traced an alternate route through a service deck. One trainee objected. "That route is longer." "By 40 seconds. "It narrows." which matters if they're trying to move a platoon. Darius looked at him. They are. The trainee's expression changed. Darius continued. They need 6 people through that maintenance corridor. Maybe 8. Once they're behind you, your perfect little choke point is facing the wrong direction. Nuvor leaned closer to the glass. The lesson continued. Darius explained how attackers used alarms to shape movement, how panicked civilians created obstacles, how a medical evacuation could accidentally open exactly the corridor hostile forces wanted, and how defenders sometimes protected the strongest door while ignoring the easiest wall. At one point, he asked a young lieutenant, "What are you defending?" "Station control." "No." The lieutenant hesitated. "The civilian population." "Closer." Darius pointed at the map. "You're defending time." Nuvor's respiratory crest shifted. Darius continued. "You need to slow them long enough for evacuation to clear, long enough for reserve security to arrive, and long enough for command to isolate critical systems. If you can hold the corridor forever, great. You probably can't. So stop planning like forever is the only success condition." The exercise restarted. The trainees did better, but not well enough, and Darius stopped them again. "Why are these medical carts here?" "They were part of the scenario." "No, why did you leave them there?" The squad leader frowned. "They're just carts. They're steel frames with batteries and oxygen cylinders sitting in your retreat route." He pointed toward the junction. "You lose this corridor, and those carts become obstacles for your own people." Nuvor watched the trainees learn. Darius was not teaching marksmanship so much as consequences. When the session ended, Nuvor waited outside. Darius emerged with his prosthetic making a faint mechanical sound as the ankle adjusted. Nuvor said, "You predicted nearly every error." "Not hard. They were trained soldiers." "Yeah. Then why did they make them?" "Training isn't experience." Nuvor followed him down the corridor. "What is the distinction?" Darius glanced at him. "You can teach somebody not to block an evacuation lane." "Yes." "You can show them the regulation." "Yes." "You can run simulations." "Yes." He stopped walking. "But if you've had to drag a wounded person through a corridor while smoke is down to your knees and someone left equipment in the middle of the route, you remember differently." Nuvor said nothing. Darius continued. "Experience is training with consequences attached." The sentence bothered Nuvor because it was not wrong. It was almost too efficient. Human language had a habit of compressing complicated principles into short statements that sounded obvious only after hearing them. Nuvor asked, "Do you resent the reassignment?" Darius's eyes shifted toward him. "Sometimes." The answer surprised him. "I assumed you would defend it." "I can defend something and still hate parts of it." They began walking again. "I wanted to go back. To frontline infantry." "Yeah." "You cannot." "No." "Does that anger you?" "Yes." Darius did not soften the answer. Nuvor appreciated that. "The prosthetic causes pain." "Sometimes." "Phantom sensation." "Sometimes." "Fatigue." "More than I like." "Then why remained?" Darius looked ahead. "Because I still know things." It was the same answer he had given before. Nuvor said, "What did you lose?" Darius stopped. His gaze dropped briefly to the prosthetic. "My left leg below the knee. Some hearing in the right ear. A few relationships I thought were stronger than they were." Nuvor was unsure whether the last answer was a joke. Darius looked back at him. "What I didn't lose was 15 years. Nuvor said nothing. Darius tapped one finger against his chest. "Still here." Then he walked away. Nuvor watched him go. For the first time, the prosthetic was not the first thing he saw. Chapter 4. The attack. The hospital alarm began during lunch. Nuvor knew it was real because Beatrice stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. She did not look toward the ceiling. She looked toward the door as a low tone sounded twice, followed by the station announcement. "Security alert. Station perimeter breach. All medical personnel initiate protected care protocol." The cafeteria changed instantly. Humans stood, chairs scraped back, and conversation vanished. Nuvor rose with them. What happened? Beatrice was already moving. Don't know. Her wrist display lit. She read quickly. Outer logistics ring took a strike. Military attack. Looks like it. Nuvor's smaller manipulators tightened against his chest. The rehabilitation center occupied part of a large orbital military medical station, several systems behind the active front. Nothing near a war was completely safe, but the station was considered protected. The station treated wounded personnel from several allied species. It also served as a logistics transfer point, communications relay, and personnel staging center. Apparently, someone had decided those functions made it worth attacking. Beatrice shoved open a door. Come on. Where? Protected ward. They moved into the medical corridor. Staff were already transferring patients. Some patients walked, some rolled, and others required powered beds or assisted transport. Nuvor began helping without being asked. A Brumethi patient recovering from thoracic surgery was being moved toward an internal shelter. Nuvor checked the respiratory monitor and found the patient stable. Another alarm sounded. Far away, something struck the station. The deck moved beneath them, not enough to throw anyone down, enough to make everyone look up. A human nurse said, "That wasn't point defense." Beatrice answered, "No." Nuvor looked toward her. "How do you know?" "Felt it through the deck." That was not sufficiently scientific, but the next impact traveled through the structure differently enough that Nuvor felt the distinction himself. The vibration traveled through the structure rather than exploding against the exterior. Boarding. The station announcement changed. Security teams respond to logistics ring 3. Civilian and medical evacuation routes Bravo and Delta now active. Personnel began moving faster. Nuvor helped push a bed until he saw Darius at the intersection ahead. The sergeant major stood near the intersection ahead. He wore no armor or combat uniform, only rehabilitation clothing and his prosthetic leg. He was staring at a wall display showing the station map. Beatrice called, "Darius." He did not respond immediately. His eyes moved over the map. Security icons were converging toward the logistics ring. Evacuation routes illuminated through the medical sector. Darius said, "No." Beatrice stopped. Nuvor nearly collided with her. "What?" Darius pointed at the map. "They won't come through Logistics 3. A medical orderly looked at him. "Security says breach is there." "The breach is there." Darius enlarged the station layout. "That doesn't mean that's where they're going." Nuvor stepped closer. The main hostile access led toward station command through 2 reinforced junctions. Security teams were forming there. Darius looked at Beatrice. "Who controls evacuation routing?" "Station Emergency Command." "Get them." "Why?" "Because they're about to push half the medical deck, exactly where the boarders want them." Nuvor felt his respiratory crest darken. "How can you know that?" Darius pointed toward the station map. "Primary route from breach to command is short and ugly. 2 hard choke points, fixed turrets, reinforced doors." He traced another path. The alternate route curved through maintenance passages along the medical sector. "It takes longer." Nuvor said, "Then why choose it?" Darius looked at him. "Because we're going to open it for them." Nuvor followed the route. Medical evacuation Bravo crossed near that maintenance section. Darius said, "Trigger enough panic, people move. Doors open, security spreads out. Medical staff fill corridors. Boarders use the confusion, cut behind them, and come out past the first defensive line." Beatrice was already on her communicator. "Station Command, this is Dr. Holloway. I have Sergeant Major Wynn with a boarding route assessment." A voice answered through static. "Medical, remain on evacuation protocol." Darius took the communicator from her. "Colonel, pull up maintenance spine 4. There was a pause while the colonel identified the voice. "Who is this? Wynn?" A second pause followed, shorter this time. "Go." Darius explained quickly and clearly how the attackers could use the current evacuation flow to conceal movement and how the maintenance spine bypassed both primary defensive junctions. The colonel asked one question. "How sure?" Darius looked at the map. "Enough that I wouldn't leave that corridor open." The answer came immediately. "Security rerouting." Darius handed the communicator back. Beatrice looked at him. You done? No. He pointed toward the evacuation lanes. Move critical care patients off Bravo. That's the protected route. It won't be if I'm right. Nuvor said. And if you are wrong? Darius looked at him. Then they take the other protected route and lose 3 minutes. Beatrice nodded. Good enough. She began issuing orders. The medical evacuation shifted. Patients requiring powered transport moved first through a secondary corridor. Walking wounded were redirected later. Equipment was pulled away from intersections. Nuvor realized Darius was telling staff to clear medical carts from corners. Nuvor recognized the problem from Darius's training exercise. Equipment left in the wrong place could become an obstacle when the corridor mattered most. Why move those? Darius answered without looking at him. Because if security has to fight through here, they need space. The deck shook again. A distant burst of gunfire carried through the structure. Darius looked toward the ceiling, then back at the map. They're inside. Nuvor's respiratory crest went cold. How can you tell? That's not ship fire. He moved toward a wall locker. Beatrice caught his arm. Darius. He stopped. You're not cleared for combat duty. No. Security is coming. Good. She held his gaze. Darius glanced at the locker, then deliberately looked away. I'm not going hunting. Beatrice released him. Good. Darius pointed toward the ward. I'm helping you move people. That Nuvor thought was sensible. 3 minutes later, the first cutting charge exploded against Maintenance Spine 4. Darius had been right. Chapter 5. He had done this before. The explosion was not large. It did not need to be. The maintenance bulkhead buckled inward. Emergency shutters slammed closed farther down the corridor. Nuvor stood beside a patient transport bed when the station lights flickered. Darius looked toward the sound. Too fast. Beatrice said, What? Security isn't there yet. She checked her communicator. They're one junction out. Darius swore, everyone back. The nearest nurse hesitated. Back where? Critical care alcove. Move. Nuvor looked toward the bulkhead. Smoke began leaking through the seam. Darius moved with an abruptness Nuvor had not seen in rehabilitation. He was not fast in the way an uninjured infantryman might have been, but every movement was efficient. He shifted weight through the prosthetic, turned, and helped redirect the nearest powered bed. Dr. Calix. Nuvor looked at him. Take the head end. Nuvor obeyed. They moved the patient behind a reinforced treatment bay. Another blast struck the maintenance door. Metal screamed. Darius grabbed the wall communicator. Security, breach imminent at Med 4 service access. We have patients in the adjacent ward. After a burst of static, security answered, 30 seconds. Darius looked at the door. No. Nuvor's chest manipulators tightened. No what? They don't have 30. The bulkhead failed. A dark-armored figure came through smoke. Darius moved. Nuvor saw the entire action badly. Later, he would reconstruct it from memory and security footage. At the time, it happened too quickly. Darius shoved the nearest medical cart sideways, not toward the attacker but across the approach angle. The hostile soldier stumbled around it. Darius did not advance. With one hand, Darius shoved Nuvor behind the treatment bay wall. Stay down. The attacker fired. Rounds struck the cart with a scream of metal and shattered medical equipment behind it. Darius pressed his service credential to a recessed emergency security locker and pulled it open. Inside was a compact station defense weapon. He took it. Nuvor stared. You are not cleared. Correct. The attacker moved again. Darius fired twice. He did not fire wildly or shoot through the oxygen lines and medical equipment between them. He waited until the border crossed an open section of wall, then fired. The hostile soldier recoiled and dropped behind cover. Darius changed position. His prosthetic foot slipped half a centimeter on debris. The powered ankle corrected the slip and Darius continued. Nuvor saw exactly what the prosthesis had done. For one bizarre instant, his entire understanding narrowed to the artificial leg. The prosthesis was functioning. It did not give Darius impossible strength or turn him into a machine. It simply allowed him to stand where he chose to stand. When the border emerged again, Darius fired and the hostile weapon dropped. The attacker retreated behind the ruptured bulkhead. Darius did not follow. Nuvor realized the reason immediately. He had patients behind him. The human was not trying to chase or kill the enemy. He was trying to stop anyone from entering the ward. A second hostile soldier came through a side service hatch Nuvor had not noticed. Darius had noticed the side hatch and turned before it fully opened, but not early enough to fire. The boarder closed the distance. Darius caught the weapon with both hands. The two bodies slammed against the wall. Nuvor saw the prosthetic leg bend under load. For one terrible second, he expected the joint to fail. It held. Darius shifted his hips, pinned the hostile weapon against the wall, and drove one elbow into the attacker's upper body. The boarder struck back hard enough to make Darius grunt and drive his shoulder into the bulkhead. Then his artificial foot rotated for leverage. He used the wall rather than trying to overpower the attacker directly. The hostile soldier lost balance. Darius trapped the weapon, twisted sharply, and a crack sounded as the boarder dropped. Darius kicked the weapon away with his biological leg. Only then did Darius stagger. Nuvor moved toward him, but Darius raised one hand to stop him. "Stay back." Gunfire erupted from the corridor. Security had arrived. 3 human soldiers pushed through from the opposite junction and engaged the retreating attackers. Darius lowered the weapon. Only then did Nuvor see blood along the side of his face. Beatrice appeared from behind the treatment bay. "You're hit." "Not shot." She grabbed his chin and turned his head. "Congratulations." "Thanks. You're still an idiot." "Also thanks." Nuvor stared at him. Darius noticed. "What?" Nuvor could think of nothing useful. The prosthetic leg was scratched, with a section of outer composite chipped near the ankle. Darius was breathing hard, and his hands shook slightly. He looked older and less indestructible than he had in the rehabilitation hall, and somehow more dangerous. Nuvor understood something all at once. He had been looking at the missing leg. The attackers had encountered everything else Darius still possessed. Chapter 6. The experience survived. The hospital survived, and so did the station. The hostile boarding force reached farther into the outer logistics ring than defenders wanted, but the attack failed to seize command systems. The medical sector suffered damage. 3 staff members were injured, and 2 patients sustained secondary injuries during the evacuation, but nobody was killed. Nuvor read the after-action summary twice, then a third time. The security analysis credited the early rerouting of medical evacuation with preventing the boarders from entering a crowded patient corridor. Darius's warning had forced station security to cover maintenance spine 4 before the main boarding group emerged. The first 2 attackers broke through ahead of security. The rest did not. Nuvor found Beatrice in a treatment room repairing the cut beside Darius's eye. Darius sat on the edge of an exam table with his prosthetic leg extended in front of him, the ankle housing removed while a technician checked the actuator. When Nuvor entered, Darius glanced up. "Doctor." "You are injured." "Apparently," Beatrice said. "Minor concussion, bruising, superficial laceration." Darius looked at her. "You make it sound boring." "It is boring. I fought a boarder. You got hit in the head." "Details." Nuvor stepped closer and looked at the prosthetic. "Damage." The technician answered. "Cosmetic shell, 1 load sensor knocked out of calibration. Joints fine." Darius said. "Told you." Beatrice pointed at him. "You are not participating in this conversation." "I'm the patient." "That's why." Nuvor almost smiled but caught himself. Instead he said, "You replaced his leg." Beatrice looked at him. "Yes." Nuvor continued. The prosthetic allowed him to move, bear weight, and fight. Darius raised one finger, temporarily and against medical advice. Beatrice gave him a flat look. He became quiet. Nuvor looked at Beatrice. "But that is not what saved the hospital." "No." Nuvor's respiratory crest shifted. He thought of the station map, the evacuation route, the maintenance spine, the carts moved away from the junction, and the timing of Darius's warning. He had recognized the attack not because of the prosthetic, but because he had seen boarding actions before. Years of boarding actions had taught him what attackers wanted, how defenders became predictable, and where civilians created risk. 15 years of experience were still there, Nuvor said. "You saved the part no prosthetic could replace." Beatrice's expression softened. "Yes." Darius looked between them. "Could you two stop talking about me like I'm a museum exhibit?" Beatrice said. No. Nuvor ignored him. If he had been medically retired 18 months ago, he would not have been here. Probably not. If he had received treatment but no retraining, he wouldn't have been teaching station defense. Nuvor looked at Darius. The human sergeant major seemed uncomfortable now, not physically but personally. Nuvor recognized that humans disliked being converted into lessons while still in the room. He adjusted. Sergeant Major. Doctor, I owe you an apology. Darius's expression changed. For what? I called you broken. Silence, Nuvor continued. I believed I was describing function. Darius waited. I was describing only one part of you. Darius looked down at the prosthetic, then back up. Yeah. Nuvor nodded. That was an error. Darius studied him, then said, Accepted. Beatrice returned to his cut. Good, now hold still. Darius winced. You enjoy this? Deeply. Nuvor looked at them. Human military medicine still seemed extravagant, but now Nuvor understood why. Chapter 7. What remained? Nuvor spent the next week reviewing human retention records because the attack had left him with a problem his original categories could no longer solve. He had expected to find a simple doctrine. Wounded personnel were rehabilitated and then kept in service whenever possible. Instead, he found decisions. Some people retired because they wanted to. Some had injuries that made continued service impractical. Some remained on medical care without returning to military work at all. Others returned to their old specialties, while a smaller number moved into training, planning, logistics, intelligence, technical work, or support roles that matched what they could do now. The system was expensive, bureaucratic, and occasionally frustrating even to the humans using it. It also refused to answer a medical question with an automatic personnel decision. One record concerned a combat pilot who had lost depth perception and could no longer fly operational missions. She now instructed new pilots in emergency procedures. Another concerned a field medic whose lower body injuries ended long-range deployment. She designed trauma simulations instead. A naval technician with reduced hand mobility after severe burns had moved into diagnostics, where his experience mattered more than speed with a tool. None of the records erased what those people had lost. Nuvor noticed that too. The humans did not pretend a reassignment was the same as getting an old life back. He found Beatrice in her office near the end of the week. You do not retain everyone. Of course not. Then I misunderstood the policy again. You keep looking for one policy that answers two different questions. Nuvor folded his upper hands. Treatment and employment. Treatment and service, Beatrice corrected. We treat the injury because it needs treating. Whether someone stays in uniform is a personnel decision made with the person, the doctors, and the service. So rehabilitation is not justified by future usefulness. No, her expression suggested he had finally stopped stepping on the same rake. If somebody never works another day, they still get care they are entitled to. But if they can work and want to, the fact that their old job closed does not automatically mean every other door has to close too. Nuvor looked through the office window. Across the courtyard, Darius was walking with a slight but controlled asymmetry while 6 young security personnel followed and listened to him talk. My species treats wounded personnel well, Nuvor said, but we often allow the medical disposition to end the personnel question. Sometimes retirement is the right answer, and sometimes it is simply the answer the paperwork already knows. Beatrice looked at him, then smiled. That sounded almost human. I reject the accusation. Too late. Nuvor returned his attention to Darius. Your system remains objectively expensive. Very. He looked at her, surprised by the easy agreement. Beatrice shrugged. Prosthetics cost money, rehabilitation costs money, retraining costs money. Good things do not become free because we approve of them. And losing 15 years of experience also has a cost. Now you are doing the accountant face on purpose. Nuvor felt his respiratory crest shift. I learned from humans. Clearly. He had stopped asking why humans kept broken soldiers. The phrase no longer described what he meant. The useful question was whether an injury had ended a person's ability to serve, or only ended one particular way of serving. Chapter 8. Return to duty. Darius received his final medical disposition 6 weeks later. Nuvor was still on Earth and attended at Darius's invitation. The sergeant major entered the rehabilitation conference room in full uniform. His prosthetic showed below the trouser break when the fabric shifted with movement. Beatrice sat beside the medical review officer, and Darius remained standing until told to sit. The decision did not pretend his injury had disappeared. He would not return to frontline assault infantry. His endurance under heavy load remained below combat requirement. Some terrain created unacceptable fall risk, and repeated high-impact movement threatened damage to the residual limb. Nuvor watched Darius's jaw tighten when the board formally closed his previous specialty qualification. He accepted the restriction, but he did not have to like it. Then the review officer continued. Darius was cleared for station defense instruction, boarding response development, limited deployment, command advisory work, and advanced tactical training. The following month he would report as a senior instructor at the Coalition Station Defense School. Darius sat very still. "Questions?" the review officer asked. "No, ma'am." "Then congratulations, Sergeant Major." Outside the conference room, Nuvor walked beside him. "You will no longer be a combat soldier." Darius looked over. Nuvor recognized the mistake before the human had to correct him. That was badly phrased. "A little. You will no longer do the same kind of combat work." "Better." They continued toward the rehabilitation courtyard. "Will you miss it?" Nuvor asked. "Parts of it." "Which parts?" "The people, some of the work," Darius considered, "not the food." Nuvor's crest shifted. That was humor. "Good catch." They reached a bench overlooking the distant training buildings. Darius sat, and Nuvor joined him. "Do you consider this outcome successful?" Darius looked down at the prosthetic, then toward the school where he would soon be working. "Ask me in a year." Nuvor appreciated that answer more than a speech about triumph. It admitted that continuation and satisfaction were not the same thing. After a moment, Darius tapped the side of the artificial leg. "They did not give me this so I could pretend nothing happened." "Then why?" "So I could decide what happens next." Nuvor was quiet. He did not write the sentence down. He knew he would remember it. Epilog. What remains? 9 months later, Dr. Nuvor Calix was back in Brumethi space when a field communications specialist appeared before the medical disposition board. She had 12 years of service and a severe pelvic injury that permanently reduced her mobility. Frontline movement requirements were no longer realistic. Under existing doctrine, the medical conclusion was straightforward: honorable retirement with pension and long-term treatment. Nuvor agreed with the physical disqualification. Then he looked past it. "How many junior technicians have you trained?" he asked. The specialist hesitated. "Perhaps 40. "Can you still teach communications, diagnostics, train technicians, and plan emergency network restoration?" The specialist answered without hesitation, "Yes." The personnel officer beside Nuvor shifted. "Doctor, none of that changes the medical determination." "Correct." The officer relaxed too early. Nuvor continued, "It may change the personnel determination. We do not have a standard reassignment category for this." "Then review it as a non-standard case." The officer looked unconvinced. "For what purpose?" Nuvor turned back to the specialist. There was one question the old procedure had never required him to ask. "Do you want to remain in service if there is work you can still do?" She blinked, "Yes." "Why?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Because I still know things." Nuvor's respiratory crest shifted. He had heard that sentence before. "Then tell us what they are." The specialist began answering. The conversation lasted 40 minutes.